Good evening, dear Mediascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Tonight, we will be discussing the general amnesty bill being discussed in the Turkish parliament. We have three experts who are going to be with us to evaluate the matter. But first, let's take a look at this week's developments. Turkey's death toll from the coronavirus rose to a total of 908, and positive cases to a total of 42,282 as of April 9. In this regard, Turkey has taken a series of new measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Here are the developments of the week.
Turkey declared a curfew for people younger than 20 years of age. The government has also made wearing a mask mandatory in crowded public places, in public transport, grocery stores, and workplaces to contain the virus. Pharmacies in Istanbul will distribute 5 masks free of charge once every 5 days to people aged between 20 and 65. Further, in his address, President Erdogan also announced that the borders of 31 cities will be shut down for all vehicles, excluding transit passage and essential supplies such as food, medical, and sanitary products. Further, Turkish authorities will track if coronavirus patients self-isolating at home are abiding by the quarantine rules or not through a mobile phone application within the framework of a newly launched project called Pandemic Isolation Tracking Project. The patients will be asked to return home if they break the quarantine rules, the presidency's Communications Directorate said in a statement on April 8. The Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality has also announced that it installed thermal cameras at 3 subway stations to screen for people with elevated body temperature, as fever is one of the main symptoms of COVID-19. Passengers who have high fever will not be allowed to use the subway. The implementation will be extended to cover all subway stations soon, Metropolitan Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu wrote on Twitter. The Interior Ministry issued a circular regarding the protection and feeding of street animals affected by the country's social distancing policies. The ministry urged local administrations to leave food to the designated locations on a regular basis so that the animals would not starve, as now much fewer people take the streets, meaning they cannot feed the animals anymore. Turkish Airlines announced early that it has suspended all domestic flights until April 20. Within the framework of struggle against the coronavirus epidemic, we are suspending our limited number of flights to 14 major cities until April 20, the airlines announced on its Twitter account.
The Turkish Medical Association has made a statement in which it said that Turkey's method of reporting deaths caused by the coronavirus might cause the official death toll to be lower than actual numbers.
According to the statement, the Health Ministry does not use the codes suggested by the World Health Organization to report the deaths. Not using these codes as recommended by international organizations such as WHO causes the number of deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic to be indicated lower, thereby creating the risk of not being able to accurately determine the extent of the problem and not adequately taking public health measures. We call on the Health Ministry to use the COVID-19 codes determined by the World Health Organization to review the death records with this approach starting from February and to apply the verbal autopsy technique if necessary. If death records are opened, the Turkish Medical Association is ready to contribute to this process, the statement read. The association statement also notes that there is no parallel between the daily number of new cases and deaths, and the figures do not match the pattern observed in other countries. Preparing documents correctly is essential to establish accurate and reliable information for epidemiological analysis and public health studies. Further, the association said that the number of healthcare workers infected was also higher than what was being officially reported. Healthcare Minister Fahrettin Koca said on Monday that 601 healthcare workers had been tested positive. According to the information collected in the field by the association, more than 1,000 healthcare personnel have been infected by the virus in Istanbul alone.
Turkey's parliament discussed a prisoner release bill on April 7 and 8, which aims to ease overcrowding in jails and protect detainees from the coronavirus, but which critics slam for excluding political prisoners.
The bill, proposed by the ruling Justice and Development Party, would temporarily free around 90,000 prisoners to address the immediate threat of coronavirus spreading in jails. A similar number would be released permanently under plans prepared last year to reduce prison overcrowding. Together, the measures would cut the prison population by 1/3, but they do not cover those convicted of terrorism charges, a charge which the government misuses for political ends. Jailed human rights activists, journalists, and opposition politicians will therefore not be among those considered for early release. People's Democratic Party deputies staged a protest against the amnesty bill as the discussion was going on at the assembly. They hit their desks as they unfurled banners reading, "We demand equality in the law on execution of sentences, no to discriminatory law on execution of sentences, and equal execution law keeps alive." Main opposition Republican People's Party deputy Özgür Özel criticized the current draft of the amnesty bill, saying that someone who has been sentenced to jail for accepting a bribe will not serve his term with the new legal amendment, whereas a journalist who wrote about this corruption incident will serve his time on charges of being a member of a terrorist organization.
This evening, Nil, Güvenç, Gürer, and Yaman Akartuna are with us to discuss the general framework of the bill. Nil Güvenç Gürer is a lawyer and mediator, and Yaman Akartuna is a lawyer. Good evening, Nil and Yaman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Before speaking about the general amnesty bill particularly, could you provide us a summary of the constitutional provisions relating to dangerous and infectious epidemics? Are there any? And now that we're going through such a period, do they seem sufficient?
Our constitution has two provisions regarding this issue that we are facing right now. The main article regarding this is the Article 15. Suspension of the exercise of fundamental rights and freedoms. And in this regard, in times of a state of emergency, state can take relevant precautions in order to prevent the situation. And in our situation, there's a public order, and as a subtitle of this public order, we should discuss the public health. This pandemic is really getting bigger, and state should take relevant precautions really fast. And with this Article 15, state can limit the freedoms, rights and freedoms of the persons, such as personal liberty, since we are all in quarantine, or freedom of movement, that this travel ban into cities, and privacy of life that maybe can be problematic with the monitoring of the COVID patients by the state. So the constitution gives power to government and state with Article 15. But in our situation, we have one other provision, that it's Article 119, which means that the president should declare state of emergency because of a pandemic. But Mr. Erdogan has not declared the state of emergency. Because of this, our government taking small precautions, not strict limitations, but small precautions. So yes, as an answer to your question, yes, the constitution gives power to prevent those kind of pandemic to the state, and the state can reinforce these measures by declaring a state of emergency.
I also want to add some points here. As an example, Yaman gave privacy of private life. Right now, our ministry is talking about an application. Okay, for now, just only monitoring people, this application is all right for us. However, after a while, after we pass this pandemic, are they going to keep this information to themselves? Because they will have a huge amount of telephone numbers, for example. And also, you know,
Personal data.
Yes, personal data will be collected in their hands. We have a new law about this. I'm not going to get into that right now, but while we were talking about that law, now they are keeping the data. So as far as they are limited, you know, if they don't go so far, I think for now the things that our government do is enough. The measures are okay right now.
The measures.
Yes.
Okay, so if we were to speak more particularly about this general amnesty bill, now, in terms of the terminology and the wording, different parties in government are using different words. The CHP is insisting that it's an amnesty bill, whereas the MHP, AKP's ally in the parliament, says it's a criminal enforcement bill. What's the essence of this difference in opinion regarding terminology?
Please go.
The essence of this terminology debate lies again in the Constitution. Because the wording of the Constitution, Article 87, says if the law has an amnesty provision, it should be passed from the Assembly with a higher majority. So, which means that in order to pass a bill regarding those kind of amnesty, with the current population of the amnesty, 354 parliament members should vote yes. If the name of the bill is amnesty, but the governing party and ally, Nationalist Party, making this name of the bill execution bill. So they say that it's not a amnesty law, so the majority can be basic majority, which means in our current population of the amnesty, 148.
Parliament members is
enough
to pass this law, pass this code.
So the terminology is important because of the quorum of the decision at the parliament. And since the name of the bill has no amnesty wording in it, they say this is a procedural execution bill, and the quorum of decision should be the basic quorum.
Also, in the past, I want to also refer to my mentor, my teacher, Mr. Süheyl Batum, who is a constitutional law professor. He also mentioned this in our classes in the past. In the past, this was an empty blank while they were arguing this. For example, if there is a 150 people, if there is not enough people, for example, like 150, would the parliament be able to pass the laws again? Would they be able to argue these? In the past, this was a blank. Right now, yes, they can do. They don't need 150 people to just arguing this code, this bill. Just in the end, while they were voting lastly, 148 people is enough for now. So this is also an important situation, I think.
So, I mean, whether it's an execution bill or, amnesty bill, I think the aim of it, or speaking about it, was to, ease overcrowding in jails and protect detainees from the coronavirus. So, but the bill is being criticized by many. So could you provide us with your evaluation of the bill, and what are some of your concerns regarding it?
Actually, again, here, because of the wording, as you said in the second question, the aim here for the parliament, this code was being talking about a lot in the past. They just fastened it. Probably they fastened it because they were scared maybe some of the jails may affect it from the coronavirus.
Yes.
In the written documents, we don't see that. We are doing this code, this bill because of coronavirus. No, the aim written in this bill is to make criminals' life or criminals to gain them in social life, or to make them, how can I say? Adapt to social life, or may let them having a new job while they were in prison, and prevent getting those criminals back to jails again. you know?
Reintegrating them into society. Yeah.
Exactly. So the aim is this, even now in this code, the aim is this one. So when you look at the aim and the inside of the code, there's differences. So this is a confusion for us also. Would you like to add something here?
As Nil said, the reasoning of the code has no wording related to coronavirus. It says in order to integrate, as you said, the criminals to social life, or to make a better correction system. Because, you know, the criminal system has the court and the correction system, and this is a bill affecting the correction system, and the legislation, Turkish embassy says that this bill will provide better correction for the criminals. But when we look at the bill, we cannot see the correction provisions. It's just missing there. So the aim is to make criminals prepared for the after imprisonment, but somehow the provisions are not seeable in the bill.
So as far as I understand, the AKP also wants to extend the scope of the bill to include prisoners sentenced for child sexual abuse on the condition that the offender is married to his victim. Such an amnesty seeking pardon for child sex offenses remains on the, has been on the agenda of the AKP since 2016, but has been shelved due to strong objections. The MHP also wanted such a bill to pass. So why is there such an insistence on this matter? And what can we say regarding the relationship of the law with morality, or, you know, more general on ethical grounds?
I would like to answer this question because as a lawyer, I've been involved in those kind of situations, and also my father was a heavy criminal court judge, and I traveled all over Turkey with my family, and the aim is at least what the ruling party and nationalistic party says, that the aim is not to protect the regular, how we can specify those kind of criminals, but not any child abuser, but because of the Anatolian culture, there are some very underage brides. So in those cases, the underage bride is away from her parents, and the law says that it should be a criminal case without any complaint. So the underage woman is living with her husband, but then a court decision comes and takes the husband and put it in prison. The problem here that this happens because of the Anatolian culture, some parts of the Anatolia. But we should discuss whether this morality should be protected by the criminal law or not. It's a huge philosophical or ethical question. It will be hours and days to discuss it, but we can say that the AKP and the AKP and Nationalistic Party wants to exclude those types of offenders because of the cultural differences. They want to mitigate those debatable offenders.
Also, when you just put, as a woman, when you put yourself, you imagine you're 15 years old, 16 years old, somehow you have got pregnant or got married, okay? So you had this abuse. From our life, from city life woman, when we see that, when we hear that, it's very interesting and horrible for us. Yes, unacceptable for us. However, in that situation, when you take the husband from that young girl, she becomes alone, you know? She has no one because she's living in the new families, she's living with the new family. So she has no one. Probably This is not the exact thinking of we can never know what does AKP wants or the other
ally
national party wants, but as far as we know our culture very well, so probably this is why they wanted to pass this law. We want them to think like that, actually.
This is the only reasonable explanation
for that.
So those accused, for example, of terrorism, however, are being excluded from the bill. On what grounds are they being excluded? I mean, President Erdogan in the past had said something along the lines of crimes committed against the government can be forgiven, but not those committed towards individuals. So in that sense, at the moment, the bill is not kind of abiding, the bill is not following this, this thought. So on what grounds are prisoners charged with terrorism being excluded?
First of all, we should be separating two terms, two terminology here. One is being held under arrest, which means that you are not convicted yet.
Okay.
But there's a prosecution against you, so you are a suspect. So suspects should be suspects, and the people who are under arrest are not a part of this bill. The bill regulates the execution of the punishment, so there should be conviction. And when we talk about conviction, we should look at the criminal code, not the execution bill that is passing, but the criminal code which regulates the punishment and the activities of the offenses of the criminals. So European Court of Human Rights criticized Turkey regarding this terrorist activity. It's a really vague terminology, and it gives a very broad margin of appreciation to the judge. So with the current criminal code, if a person is convicted due to terrorist activity, it cannot be, he or she cannot be taking advantage of this new bill. Mm-hmm. But it's not the matter of this bill, it's the criminal code matter. So in order to prevent those kind of vague and unforeseeable results, the criminal code should be more specific.
And also, we want to think that right now, the prisoners who are like, if you just been found guilty and sent to jail, first 2 weeks, you are not able to get into this
general
population. You have 14 days quarantine there. So if you look at from this perspective, jails should be, and maybe, we don't know, the best places away from coronavirus right now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because also there are different types of jails here in Turkey. Mm-hmm. You know, we have open ones, we have closed ones, we have strict ones. So this depends on which part of them they want to take out. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When it comes to the open ones, the criminals in that jails, they can go to their houses in the weekend. So when they come to they come back to the jail again, the open ones, they can spread it to anyone. So there are differences. The closed ones, the strict ones that we are talking about, the terrorist ones, they are the most protected ones. They should be the most protected ones. Anything happens there, if they die or they got the virus, they have to have the best medication and healthcare. Mm-hmm.
So are you personally concerned about those prisoners?
Personally, we always concerned about any kind of, not because it's a terrorism, not because it's a,
whatever the accusation is.
Yes, actually, yes, exactly. Uh-huh. So we always concerned about them. Coronavirus, yes, there should be more restrictions in the jails. For example, right now they cannot see their families. They just do what we do. They talk from telephone with pictures.
Yeah.
For example, this is an example.
Nil and Yaman, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your expertise.
We thank you very much.
We thank you. If you just let me add some words about this code also. Yes, there are some problems about this code. And the biggest problem is we don't know if this is, how can I say, they diverse the crimes. And by that, if you are convicted from, for example, which crime you can say?
Murder.
For example, murder. It's different, and terrorism different from this in this execution code that we are talking about. This is not equal to everyone. So the problem starts here. And also, I just want to finish with this. This bill has a chaotic wording. So with this chaotic wording, we cannot say what's going to happen. Even the president of Union of Turkish Bar, Istanbul Bar Association, or Izmir Bar Association's presidents, they cannot also say anything, about this code. So for more, application of this code is unforeseeable right now. If you just ask us as lawyers, what would it be if this passes? How are you going to act? Even though we don't know, we can say this.
So I guess we will know more about this next week. I mean, they're going to obviously vote this bill at some point. Yes. So this will happen in the next week or so, and we'll know more for sure by then.
Definitely.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
This evening, Çiğdem Çımrın is with us to assess the General Amnesty Bill in relation to Turkey's human rights track record. Çiğdem is a lawyer, consultant, lecturer, and human rights advisor. Good evening, Çiğdem. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, Shirin. It's a pleasure being here.
So statements have been made by the United Nations and the European Council with regards to the plight of prisoners during the coronavirus outbreak. They have called on governments to release prisoners to slow down the transmission of the virus. Before speaking about Turkey's particular response, how have other nations gone about relieving prisons? Which prisoners have been prioritized within the scope?
Intergovernmental organizations such as United Nations and Committee for the Prevention of Torture of the Council of Europe, which is also known as CPT, have published statements to take the focus of global community to persons deprived of their liberty in prisons, detention centers, immigration detention centers, healthcare facilities. In their statements, they first remind all actors, but particularly state actors, the absolute nature of the right of life, as well as the prohibition of torture and inhuman treatment. This is extremely important. We all know that prisoners and detainees might face higher vulnerabilities as the spread of the virus can expand rapidly due to the usually high concentration of people in such confined spaces and with limited access to healthcare services. In fact, some countries like Turkey, they have super overcrowded prisons, which would lead to a higher possibility of catastrophic impact of COVID-19 outbreak. Keeping all these people together does not make physical distancing or self-isolation possible, which are strongly encouraged, if not demanded by experts. The UN High Commissioner on Human Rights also shared her concern that they have been receiving news about increasing number of deaths and suffering in an expanding number of countries' prisons. Accordingly, these organizations urge all governments to work quickly to reduce number of people in detention centers, including political prisoners and those detained for their critical and dissenting opinions. Coming back to your question about how other states are dealing with protecting prisoners and detainees in their own territories. Well, Iran, for example, just had released around 100,000 inmates, representing 40% of their entire prison population. Indonesia, on the other hand, had announced that it would free 30,000 individuals convicted from minor crimes. Kenya has already released 4,000 inmates to reduce the size of the population, prison population. To my knowledge, the US has the largest incarcerated population in the world, something around 2.3 million people. An increasing number of them, unfortunately, have already contracted COVID-19. And American authorities, unfortunately, seem doing very poorly on addressing this issue at the moment. They've been having debates while people are suffering, which this situation creates major concern in and outside of the US.
Mm-hmm. Well, Turkey also has taken action to curb the overcrowding problem in prisons. And as you know, there's an amnesty bill being discussed, yet those accused of terrorism charges are being excluded from this bill. In the past, for example, President Erdogan had stated that crimes against the government could be pardoned, but not those against individuals, yet the scope of the bill suggests otherwise. Furthermore, just as some background information for our viewers, terrorism charges in Turkey have frequently been used for political means in order to shut the opposition up. And so it includes political prisoners, lawyers, journalists, human rights defenders, and academics. So these individuals will continue to stay in prison irrespective of their underlying health conditions or vulnerability to COVID-19 infection. Considering that many of these prisoners are being held behind bars despite alarming lack of evidence, how can the bill be evaluated in terms of those it includes and excludes? Shouldn't health concerns be at the top of the list when deciding on the scope of such a bill?
Look, Shirin, I think I should address your question with a human rights-based approach, which we often fail to do so in Turkey. While discussing situations of persons deprived of their liberties, we should first consider the right to life and their right to human treatment, which are all protected under European Convention on Human Rights as well as Turkish Constitution. These rights are absolute. In other words, there can be no legitimate ground whatsoever to limit these rights. States like Turkey have obligations and duties under international law to safeguard human rights of prisoners and detainees, particularly their right to life, health, and human treatment. These rights continue to apply in all circumstances, including public emergencies like COVID-19 outbreak. UN Human Rights Committee consistently held that by arresting, detaining individuals, the state take on the responsibility to care for prisoners' life and well-being. Likewise, there are many rulings of human rights courts, including the one in the Strasbourg and Inter-American Court, requiring states to take necessary legislative and administrative measures to prevent the spreading of contagious disease like hepatitis and tuberculosis. So this is very clear. Up to here, I think we managed to establish that when we are discussing amnesties or conditional releases of prisoners and detainees due to serious health threat, preventative actions are in line. Turkey's preventative actions are in line with its existing duties and obligations under international law, international human rights, as well as its constitution. But there is another principle that we should be considering while sailing through these waters: non-discrimination principle or equal treatment principle. Accordingly, it is extremely important for states to protect these rights while respecting non-discrimination principle. From a human rights perspective, not regarding equal treatment principle is what is problematic and incredibly vital about the amendment to the criminal enforcement law in Turkey, which was proposed to combat the spread of pandemic in detention centers. Because virus makes no discrimination, right? It has a blanket effect. So yes, if the ultimate goal of the government is to protect public health and therefore release prisoners to reduce overpopulated Turkish prisoners, then they should stick to that purpose and apply early or conditional release to prisoners with some exceptions, by the way, like crimes like genocides, crimes against humanity, human trafficking, torture against children, or in other words, crimes which really bothers public conscience. But most importantly, detainees by this time, at least, considering another important legal principle, which is the presumption of innocence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, speaking of those, the prisoners, I mean, that we were mentioning, some of them actually do have very serious health problems, such as Selahattin Demirtas, who, you know, has a respiratory system problem, which makes him vulnerable to the virus. Same goes for Ahmet Altan. So in this context, I mean, it's one thing, you know, restricting their individual freedoms, but it's another thing to condemn them to death. So do you think this distinction will be taken into consideration at any point?
I wish I know the right answer about whether such distinction is or will be taken into consideration by the government. I hope it will be. But as a human rights lawyer, I believe that the right to life, right to health, prohibition against torture, equal treatment, and proper application of the law should be kept and valued on top of everything. These are also a requirement of the rule of law and justice, as stated under various international human rights law texts, including Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Turkish Constitution.
Çiğdem, finally, I'd like to ask you how you think this bill will affect the sense of justice in Turkey and human rights in crisis situations.
COVID-19 is a serious global challenge, but in my opinion, it's also a wake-up call to revitalize universal human rights law and standards, which must, without any exceptions, prevail over the spread of fake news, prejudice, discrimination, inequalities, and violence. Everyone must be united in facing this challenge, including Turkish parliamentarians or politicians, regardless of their political affiliations. I think this is a perfect time to remedy wrongdoings, Shirin, together, and to reinstitute justice mechanisms by being more inclusive through rights-based approach. If we fail to reconcile by not turning this threat into an opportunity, then there is a high chance of finding ourselves in a vacuum, where it's not possible to talk about the notion of human rights and justice or rule of law anymore.
Mm-hmm. Çiğdem Çımrın, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your assessment of the amnesty bill.
Thanks for having me, Shirin.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has filed a criminal complaint against Fox TV news anchor Fatih Portakal for suggesting the government might require citizens to dig into their bank accounts to help battle the coronavirus fallout.
On Monday, Erdogan alluded to emergency measures taken when calling for a national solidarity campaign. The national tax laws imposed during Turkey's War of Independence in 1921 allow the government to seize 40% of all food, clothing, and machinery. What if they ask for money for those who have deposits or savings by invoking the national tax orders and saying, "We are going through difficult days," Portakal tweeted afterwards. What if they say they will pay it back after the coronavirus? I can't say that it won't happen, unfortunately. Erdogan is suing Portakal for spreading lies and manipulating the public on social media. Another complaint against the journalist was filed by the Banking Regulation and Supervision Agency, which claimed that Portakal harmed the reputation of the banks with his post. Authorities have detained 229 people over the past 3 weeks for provocative social media posts about the pandemic, according to the Interior Ministry. In a Twitter post, the ministry said 3,576 social media accounts have been examined and 616 suspects identified.
The Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts, which curates the Istanbul Film Festival, has partnered with the online film streaming platform Mubi, which will screen a selection of films that have previously won awards at the film festival.
This year's Istanbul Film Festival was scheduled to be held between April 10 and 21, but it was postponed following the coronavirus outbreak. When the festival was postponed, its director Kerem Ayan spoke with MUBI Turkey director Cem Altınsaray about an alternative solution. Now, MUBI will screen a selection of films that have previously won awards at the festival during the initially planned dates. Normally, MUBI offers a 1-week free trial period, but for the festival, they will be offering 1 month for free, which will enable viewers to stream the selected films as well as other films streaming on the platform. Due to the uncertainty surrounding the coronavirus epidemic, it is unclear when the actual edition of Istanbul's 39th Film Festival will be held, and there have been other concerns about Istanbul's cinema culture following the news of the permanent closure of 2 well-known independent movie theaters, Beyoğlu's Atlas Cinema and Kadıköy's Rex Cinema. Ayan said that Atlas Cinema will be restored and reopened as a cinema museum by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and that Rex could once again open its doors if it found sponsors or other forms of financial support, adding that things were already difficult enough for the city's independent cinemas prior to the virus reaching Turkey.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.